In a quiet village where the fields stretched like a green tapestry, Dr. Arthur Dunn, a scientist consumed by curiosity, stared at the sky. He wasn't just a man of science. He was also a man of doubt, relentlessly questioning, seeking proof, breaking down every belief in pursuit of the truth. Far from him, Maria, a humble woman, lived by an unshakable faith. Her Bible, worn and dog-eared, was always near, offering her the answers to life's mysteries. Their paths crossed one fateful day. Arthur, in search of answers, and Maria, with an open heart to God's voice, met in the center of the village. He tried to engage her in a conversation about his scientific theories, while Maria, in her quiet wisdom, shared that faith, not logic, was the key to understanding life's complexities. Arthur could not ignore the pull between logic and faith that had sparked inside him. He began to visit Maria more often, discussing the things he couldn't grasp with science, from the inexplicable movements of nature to the deeper questions of existence. Maria, in turn, shared her own thoughts on why some things needed to be accepted without the need for explanation. As they sat together, the debate grew heated. Arthur argued that science could explain everything, while Maria, with gentle conviction, spoke of the mysteries that only faith could unlock. The turning point came when Arthur, frustrated by his lack of answers, exclaimed, "If faith is the answer, then why do we still suffer? Why do bad things happen to good people?" Maria, without flinching, replied, "Faith doesn't promise that we won't suffer, but it gives us strength to endure, and in the end, we understand that there's more beyond what we can see." That night, Arthur found himself staring at the stars, torn between what he believed and what Maria had shown him. It was a moment that would stay with him forever. Arthur's mind couldn't rest. Every theory, every equation, seemed insufficient when weighed against the question Maria had posed. He turned to his research, trying to find answers in data, numbers, and logic. But deep inside, there was a yearning, a gap that science alone couldn't fill. Meanwhile, Maria continued with her daily routines, prayer, tending to her garden, and sharing meals with the village. She didn't need proof to know the truth. For her, the presence of God was in everything, from the smallest seed sprouting to the quiet breeze on her face. One morning, as Arthur sat in his lab, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. He had been studying a phenomenon that defied the laws of physics, and suddenly, a pattern began to emerge. For a fleeting moment, he felt a sense of awe, like he had uncovered a secret. It was as though the universe had whispered something to him. But even in this moment of discovery, Arthur realized that no matter how many equations he solved, the answer he sought seemed elusive. He rushed to Maria's house, eager to share his findings. Yet, when he arrived, he saw something that made his heart race. Maria was in the middle of a prayer, her eyes closed in peaceful surrender. "Do you ever wonder," Arthur asked, as he sat down beside her, "if there's something beyond what we can explain?" Maria opened her eyes, her face serene. "I don't need to wonder. I know that God is beyond our understanding, and that's what faith is. It's believing even when we can't see the full picture." Arthur paused. He had no words. For the first time, he felt as though he had stepped into a world that he couldn't dissect with logic. It was a world where belief and trust were the keys to understanding. Arthur's approach to science began to shift. He began to wonder if there were more mysteries to the universe than his theories could explain. He began to explore ideas that bridged science and faith, searching for common ground where the two could coexist. He discovered that some scientific principles, like the complexity of life and the universe's fine-tuning, could be interpreted as evidence of a higher power. Maria noticed a change in him. She no longer saw him as a skeptic, but as someone seeking truth in his own way. As their conversations continued, the tension between science and faith became more apparent. Arthur couldn't ignore his scientific upbringing, and Maria couldn't deny her deep-rooted faith. They both, in their own ways, sought the same truth, but the paths they followed were different. One was led by reason, and the other by belief. The village began to notice the change in the two of them. Some people supported Arthur's scientific views, while others embraced Maria's spiritual wisdom. The debate between the two worldviews became the talk of the town, and the questions that Arthur and Maria posed to one another echoed through the streets. Arthur found himself consumed by doubt. What if he had been wrong all along? What if everything he believed in was just a theory, a human construct to explain the unexplainable? One evening, in the quiet of his lab, he collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his own questions. Maria, sensing his inner turmoil, came to visit him. She said nothing, but simply sat beside him in silence, her presence calming his restless mind. Maria shared a story from her childhood, a tale of how, during a storm, she had prayed for her father's safety. Against all odds, her father returned home unharmed. It wasn't just a coincidence, Maria believed. It was the power of God at work. Arthur listened intently, but part of him still struggled to accept such stories without logical explanations. But there was something in Maria's eyes that made him question everything he had once thought certain. One quiet morning, as Arthur wandered through the village, he felt the weight of his thoughts lift. He gazed at the horizon, the golden light of the sunrise painting the sky. In that moment, he realized that science could explain so much, but there was a mystery in life that could only be understood through faith. He returned to Maria, humbled and changed. "I don't have all the answers," he said, "but I'm starting to believe that there's more than science alone can explain." Maria smiled softly, knowing that their journey together was just beginning. Arthur's mind remained restless, constantly torn between the rigidity of scientific understanding and the warmth of the spiritual truth Maria embodied. He had come to appreciate the beauty of faith, but he still yearned for hard evidence. It wasn't enough to believe simply because Maria did. He wanted to reconcile both worlds in a way that would make sense. Maria could see the struggle within him. Yet, her own path had always been simple. Faith wasn't something she had to prove, but something she experienced. However, seeing Arthur's genuine desire to understand, she decided to introduce him to something that had helped her many times: the quiet peace of nature. One afternoon, Maria took Arthur on a walk through the fields that bordered the village. They passed through tall grasses swaying in the breeze, birds singing from the treetops. Maria stopped by a bubbling stream and knelt down to touch the water. "Do you see this?" she asked. "This is the work of God, even in its simplicity. The earth flows as it's meant to." Arthur squatted beside her, his fingers brushing the cool water. It was beautiful. He could feel it, a profound sense of peace. But his mind kept asking how. He knew this natural order had a purpose, but how did that purpose fit into the grand scheme of the universe? Maria smiled softly, sensing his inner battle. Sometimes the answers are not in the how, but in the why. Why do we exist, Arthur? Why does life flow like this? A few days later, Arthur received an invitation to speak at a scientific conference in the city. The topic was the intersection of science and religion, a modern perspective. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to present his ideas. He wasn't sure what he believed yet. He hadn't quite resolved the tension between faith and science in his own mind. At the same time, Maria was praying for him. She knew Arthur's heart had opened, but she also understood how hard it was for him to reconcile his rational mind with his growing sense of spirituality. She wrote a note for him, a simple message: "Trust in what you know to be true." The day of the conference, Arthur stood before a room full of skeptical minds. He spoke about his research, his findings, and the evidence he had gathered. But when it came time to address the intersection of science and religion, Arthur hesitated. Finally, he said, "I've been wrestling with two different paths: science, which seeks to explain everything through logic and reason, and faith, which teaches us to believe without the need for explanations. But I'm starting to see that maybe they are not as different as they seem." It was a long silence. Some in the room looked confused, others intrigued. But for Arthur, it was a breakthrough. For the first time, he wasn't trying to force the two worlds together. He was simply allowing them to coexist in his heart. Although Arthur had made a breakthrough in his own understanding, there were still moments when doubt crept in. One evening, he found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. It was in these quiet hours that his mind raced, asking questions with no immediate answers. How could the complexities of a universe and the simplicity of faith truly coexist? Maria, as always, offered him solace, not in her words, but in her presence. She sat by his side one evening, watching the flickering of the candlelight. "Arthur, I don't have all the answers," she said gently. "But what I do know is that faith is a journey, not a destination. And sometimes we don't need to understand everything to feel peace." He took her hand in his, unsure of what to say. The tension between the two worlds still felt like a storm raging in his chest. But there was something in her words that calmed the turmoil, something beyond logic, something rooted in her quiet faith. As time went on, Arthur's journey began to take him into new territory. He encountered more phenomena that his scientific mind couldn't explain, such as the way people healed from ailments without any medical intervention, or how some inexplicable events seemed to happen just when they were needed most. One night, after a particularly puzzling encounter with a patient who claimed to have been miraculously healed, Arthur found himself in a state of turmoil. He visited Maria, hoping that she might have some insight. "Maria," he said, "I don't know what to believe anymore. There's something beyond science that I can't understand. But how do I reconcile this with everything I've spent my life studying?" Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with compassion. "Faith, Arthur, doesn't need to be proven. It is felt in the heart. And sometimes, the most beautiful truths in life are the ones we can't see or measure." Arthur took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. It was a test of belief, and he realized that he had already begun to cross a threshold he hadn't expected. Arthur found himself spending more time with Maria, not just in conversation, but in reflection. He began to see the subtle ways in which faith and science weren't opposing forces, but rather two lenses through which to view the world. Faith offered the comfort of knowing there was something greater than the physical world, while science gave him the tools to explore and understand the natural world. His research began to take on a new light. Instead of searching for the ultimate answer to life's questions, he began to look for the interconnectedness between science and faith. The more he learned, the more he realized that perhaps they weren't so far apart after all. Maria noticed the change in him. She no longer saw him as a skeptic, but as someone seeking truth in his own way. Despite his growing understanding, there were still moments of tension. Arthur would sometimes find himself in a deep argument with his colleagues, defending his newfound perspective on the relationship between science and faith.